is your Classic Metal Show right here on theclassicmetalshow.com. That, of course, was AC/DC. The name of that tune is Guns for Hire. That from my favorite release from the band, Flick of the Switch. And on the line right now, we have the author of not only maybe the greatest AC/DC book ever written, but also the author of Led Zeppelin, all the albums, all the songs, as well as about a zillion other books. It is the one, the only, it's Martin Popoff. Martin, how are you, man?
Hey, I'm doing just fine. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Sure, man. Well, Martin, I have got to say, as somebody, I myself am putting out my fourth book at the end of this month, and it's taken me 5 years to write, I would say 200,000, 250,000 words. I can't even fathom how you put this much work, this much research, and this much great quality content into so many books so fast. It is an amazing achievement, man.
Well, I mean, it is my full-time job, so I mean, everything else in this business has sort of fallen away. There's not a lot of liner notes and print magazines, that's for sure. Right. But I guess you also got to be a fast writer too. That helps. I've got buddies who are great writers, but they're so slow at it that you wonder, man, you won't get anything done. But 250,000 words, that's a long book.
Well, it's four books total. It's I wrote 2 about rock stuff and two about like personal stuff, but I know the grind is what I guess I'm trying to say, and it is a grind sometimes. It's hard, and this is something I definitely want to talk to you about with your 2 books here, the latest 2. It's very hard sometimes to come up with. It's not hard to come up with ideas, at least for me, it's not, but it's very hard to compartmentalize them and not overthink them, but at the same time not get repetitive with the same ideas. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the Zeppelin book, I mean, these are very different books, but you're right. So much has been said, say, for example, on a band like Zeppelin, and for that book, here I am, I got to write 350, 400 words for every single song. So you bring up an interesting word, compartmentalize. It's kind of good in a sense when you're given a structure such as something like that, where it's like 81 songs, I believe it is, across the studio albums. And you got to get in and get out. But once you're out. And then you can move on to the next song or the next album. So it's good to be given, forced upon you a lot of structure sometimes as well.
No doubt, man. Well, Martin, in the world of rock, and we will get into the books here in a second, but I just wanted to make a point about how in the world of rock, there's really like the big 2 and everybody else. There's you and there's Joe MacGyver, and then the rest of us. I mean, you guys have really risen to be the top guys, the most respected guys, the most prolific guys in the hard rock, heavy metal world. When you started writing books and when you started, writing professionally, did you ever see yourself ascending to the top of the heap?
No, I mean, I was working with Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles, so we had a magazine going, and that's where I amassed, all these interviews along the way, and that gives you a lot of sort of a springboard to get a book going. I mean, when I'd write a book on a band, I'd sort of tell myself, look, if I haven't talked to them 20 times myself, I've got nothing here to add to the situation, but it also gives you a lot of words to work with right away. So, these ideas just keep coming up as you keep talking to these guys, amassing all those record reviews, right? The first book was an indie record review book, but then another one, and then we split it into decades. And now, apparently I've written more record reviews than anybody in the history of writing record reviews, at about 7,900 record reviews, right?
Wow.
So, the stuff just, sometimes I just look at my archive or think, I really want to get into this band or go restudy this band, that it's kind of a joy to do it, right? It's fun just because it lets you revisit the band. I mean, this Zeppelin book, it's just like I say, writing about every single song like that. This is the deepest analysis I've ever had of Zeppelin. I don't know if I could ever listen to Led Zeppelin ever again after doing that. But yeah, that's a lot of fun too, just getting to revisit a band.
Sure. Well, since you brought up the Zeppelin book, let's start there. The name of the book is Led Zeppelin, all the albums, all the songs. The first thing that jumps out to me as a big Zeppelin fan, but not necessarily, I'm one of those guys, I love the music, but I tend to not always dig into the minutia of my favorite bands just because a lot of times it kind of spoils it.
Right.
But reading your book, the level of research that you've done, and obviously a lot of it comes from interviews, but a lot of this is also your personal knowledge. I mean, you couldn't do these interviews as well as you do without this knowledge already. How did you come up with so much knowledge and so many different sources to source for, I mean, it's difficult to come up with topics on every single song of a band.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that brings up a good point, because so much of this is knowledge that is out there, and I'm parsing the words, the very few words the Zeppelin guys ever, they're a bit of a mysterious band
Sure.
on the way they did things. So there's a lot of information out there. You're kind of synthesizing it, putting together. I mean, there's actually been 2 books like this that went song by song with Zeppelin already. I felt kind of like, oh man, I'm kind of reinventing what's already been invented here. But having said that, there are these other avenues you can go down. Like, you could read the lyrics and give a little interpretation or a little encapsulation of what the lyrics are. Not everybody who's ever talked about Zeppelin songs has done that for this song or that song or that song. And then, also just soaking in this music since the 70s, being such a huge fan, just by osmosis, you become somewhat of an expert on a band. And then also, playing a little bass, but definitely being a drummer, and talking actually even to guitar buddies about certain guitar-y things on here. But I certainly can easily myself, break apart the drumming as an authority, being a drummer myself. So there are all these different little things you can add to it, and then also on top of that, put on the famous, here's where I get to have my opinion. Right. And so I can be opinionated and I can review these songs. And not every song, even in books that went song by song, are their reviews. So, you look at this checklist of 4 or 5 or 6 different things you can talk about per each song, and you just say, okay, on this topic, is there anything interesting to say? Like a lot of them, I didn't say anything about the lyrics because the lyrics weren't interesting. But if the lyrics were interesting, I did talk about them. So, yeah, I mean, you can sit down and knuckle down and find enough things to say to make it interesting. I think it is a very cool book.
Sure. Now, were there songs throughout their catalog anywhere where you really, really struggled to find anything on? I mean, there's no real information out there, no real interview quotes about that song, and really you were kind of like meh with the song.
Yeah, a lot of them are like that. I mean, basically, this is a band that famously has not really talked about the songs all that much.
Right.
It's funny, like when going through Zeppelin books or Zeppelin articles, and let's face it, I mean, most of the Zeppelin books are based on the Zeppelin articles.
Right.
And it's funny to see that, this is a band people say famously didn't do very much press. It turns out they actually did a fair bit of press, but it's all very surface. I mean, they hold their cards close to their chest. I mean, a lot of it is about playing live and just lifestyle and being out there and doing all this stuff, but not a lot of it is about the making of the albums. But I swear though, every single Zeppelin song, you could put on a good pair of headphones and go in and find really interesting things going on. You could have a whole debate about whether Led Zeppelin productions are good or not, or possibly they're made for radio or not, or certain types of stereos. But there are all sorts of little trivia foibles and things like, what guitars, what effects, where do you hear the squeaky bass drum pedal, where do you hear fret noise, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a lot going on. John Paul Jones plays acoustic guitar and mandolin and something, keyboards. So there's all sorts of textures and things in Zeppelin songs. So it was a pretty interesting thing to put together for sure.
No doubt. Now, Robert Plant has been pretty steadfast about not wanting to revive Zeppelin, no matter what the money is. And obviously they did the thing in 2007. But other than that, they really have very rarely, if ever, gone out. And it's been mostly Plant, the way I understand it, is he has not wanted to do that. I personally think that is probably the number one reason that Led Zeppelin has stayed as iconic as they have, because they're the one band that probably could do it, but has chosen to leave the legacy alone. Do you agree with that, or do you think that they really should, while they're still, while 3 of them and Jason are alive, should go out and do one run of the States for fans?
No, I actually totally agree with you. And I think that is the reason why they've kept it that way. I think it's great what they did in 2007 because it was actually a really good performance, and
Sure.
it looks great, it sounds great, and they pulled it off. And pulling it off with Zeppelin, I mean, famously, this is a band that throughout history they've had absolutely monumental shows, and they've had shows where people said they were just phoning it in, or they did a lousy job, or they were too stoned, or whatever.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is that music can be pretty difficult, and what they do and what they did there is they actually made it more difficult in places, and a lot of that is the engine room from below fueling things. Jason's an amazing drummer. So he has a lot to do with it, but the other guys, of course, are musical as well. But the big thing here is that, all these guys, all these singers, we could go down the list and name the ones who absolutely can't do it anymore and are embarrassing themselves. But Robert Plant I think he's 71 or something
Sure.
like that. And he keeps putting out solo albums, and they're great. And he has a certain other type of music he wants to do. Number one, he's got the philosophy that he doesn't like to look back. Number two, he wants to just keep making new music, and he's excited by music. And number three, he loves folk music and world music. And so all of his studio albums are going in that direction. I'm glad he went back on his, notion a little while ago and says, I don't have any more songs to write in me. I don't want to write songs. So he's writing again, which is really cool. Sure. But it's commendable that he doesn't want to do that. But it's also, he and they, but especially he, the vocals of these 70-year-old, guys are, and I say guys because girls have an easier time keeping their voices this late in life. But, that's the weak link. So, obviously everything's got to be tuned down. He's got to sing a register down, all that kind of stuff. He doesn't want to go out and embarrass himself. And it wouldn't even be embarrassing himself because he realizes he's got to use his voice the way it works properly. And the way it works properly is on these studio albums he's making. It's quite commendable that he's out there making all this great new music. But no, I don't think they should do it. And I totally agree with you that it's one of the reasons why the legacy is as strong as it did. They took the artistic risk and did it once, and it turned out great. And that's actually not the first time, because they took that risk once before with Live Aid, and it turned out crappy, right?
Right, sure.
That left a bad taste in everybody's mouth about doing it, and that's probably why they didn't do it for so long. But they did it, knock wood, it worked, leave it be.
Is it interesting to you, as it is to me, that Robert has really been able to create? I mean, he's created a career that if he hadn't been in Led Zeppelin, damn near any artist would love to have. I mean, he's had at least 10 big hits, and he's written so many great albums post Led Zeppelin. Is it surprising to you that he's the only one that Jimmy, especially Jimmy, as much as Jimmy is regarded, he really has not been able to do anything that doesn't say Led Zeppelin that anybody's cared about?
Yeah, that's true. I love Robert Plant's solo stuff.
Me too.
I mean, I wouldn't mind even writing a big analysis like this on the Robert Plant stuff. I find those albums absolutely great, especially I've been saying this for years on record. I mean, I think Principle of Moments is as good as any Led Zeppelin album.
Right.
His second album. I loved that album when it came out. It's one of my top 10 albums of all time. My favorite Zeppelin would be Physical Graffiti. I'd put it right up there with Physical Graffiti. I love the first one. I love all the daring changes and things he did throughout, but I loved Robbie Blunt as a guitarist. Wow. But yeah, so many great albums there. Of course, Jimmy hasn't been able to do it. He's got, he's got his Outrider solo album. He's got the Fern stuff. But the other one that I think is an amazing album that people forget about a lot is Walking into Clarksdale. So I want to say for sure that Jimmy, by far, his greatest achievement is Walking into Clarksdale after Led Zeppelin, and Roberts is probably Principle of Moments. John Paul Jones, he's a really interesting dude. He went out and did all sorts of stuff with other people. He likes collaborating. He's more of like a like a Jack Bruce in that, he just wants to do completely artistic things. And he's done a few pretty cool solo albums as well. So it's fine. I mean, I think it's fine what he wanted to do. But yeah, I think Jimmy is the one where you think, why didn't you do more? Why didn't you get out there and do more and have more that was well regarded? It's kind of too bad. But, I'm pretty darn up there to say Walking into Clarksdale is, if you stuck that in my list of favorite solo albums, Zeppelin albums, collaboration albums, that would probably make my top 5 or 6.
Wow.
Including all the Zeppelin albums. I just love that record.
Sure. Now let's move over to this other book that you have, Martin. One of many, the AC/DC album by album release. AC/DC, probably, I'm going to guess, a little bit easier to come up with information on because they just seem like they're not. They seem to be more than willing to talk about just about anything they've ever done. At least that's been my opinion of them. Was this one somewhat easier to come up with information on?
Well, the interesting thing about this one is I let other people do the work.
Okay.
What this is this is the second of a series of these I've done for this publisher, and they're gorgeous books. I just love the production values on all of these books they're doing. But
sure.
I didn't do one, but they had one on Bob Dylan called, I think, Disc by Disc. But then I did Rush album by album, and now AC/DC album by album. And the whole idea is that I'm supposed to gather together a panel of about 20 people. Experts of all stripes, maybe some rock stars, maybe some people in tribute bands, journalists, some people close to the band but not exactly right in the band, although Phil Rudd is included in this a little bit, but he's not a primary speaker. But so the idea is to gather a panel and say, you know what? You've got to prepare yourself to be able to talk about 2 different studio albums at length for a good half hour, 45 minutes.
Sure.
And then the idea is I'm supposed to put it together like we're all sitting around, a bar room or a kitchen table drinking beers and talking only about Power Age for about 10 pages. Right? Every single song, the vocals, the production, favorite guitar riffs, solos, all that kind of stuff. So this is a cool series where it's very different, incredibly different from the Zeppelin book. By the way, I don't know if you know this, but I've already finished one just like the Zeppelin book on The Clash.
Oh, wow.
For those guys. And I've actually finished one just like the AC/DC one and the Rush one on Pink Floyd and on Iron Maiden.
Oh, very cool.
So, yeah. So, but the AC/DC was, coming from the Rush, it's like, my first thought was, oh my God, what is anybody going to be able to say about these albums? AC/DC songs are pretty simple and, they're famously, the albums are similar to each other, but there were so many cool storylines to talk about, like the interpersonal relations and the change in the singer and all that kind of stuff. Right.
Sure.
There was all, how all these different producers put their stamp on it. So it turned out to be, my gut feel, and even my contact at the publisher who I deal with practically on a daily basis, Dennis Pernew, we almost felt that this is even better than the Rush album by album one. And you think that couldn't happen given, the complexity of Rush and the simplicity of AC/DC. But this is a great read.
Sure.
And it's just everybody has their own take on things, what they want to talk about the most, their personal relationship with AC/DC, when they first discovered them and stuff. But it just makes for a great read, start to finish. It's just like a bunch of your buddies all sitting around drinking beers talking about AC/DC.
Absolutely. And I'm much more of a Zeppelin. I mean, I read these like back to back. So I'm much more of a Zeppelin guy than an AC/DC guy. Like AC/DC, not necessarily, there's probably no love for me for them. Enjoy, right. I'm like a lot of people. I enjoy them. I don't turn it off if it's on the radio. I own everything, but if I was listing my top 10 bands, they would never end up in it. But what I found very interesting in these conversations there were points made about records that I really had never considered. And I'll point to one specifically. Like I said at the beginning of this, my favorite AC/DC record is Flick of the Switch. And there's a little tiny, it's probably 1/2 of one sentence in the book that says that this was the last consistently written album of the band's career. And I had to really look at that point, and then I went and looked at the rest of the catalog, and I was like, that is so absolutely true. You know, all the rest of them have some good songs, but Flick of the Switch is the last one that I could just put on and go, all right, that kicked ass. You know, and it's that kind of little nuggets of knowledge that I found in this book to be most appealing.
Yeah, there's loads of those things. I mean, these were some really smart guys talking about all this. So, but yeah, and I'll totally agree with you. I love Flick of the Switch. To me, it's like their Black Sabbath Born Again kind of thing.
Sure.
Like this heavy, weird, you know, odd stepchild of an album in there. And I love that it's so heavy. You know, it's probably their heaviest album, I would think.
Sure.
And it's definitely my favorite of the Brian era. My favorite is probably Power Age out of all of them. Probably for me, it goes Power Age, Highway to Hell, Flick of the Switch.
Okay, very cool.
You know, and yeah, I mean, I am a huge AC/DC fan. I really like them a lot. I mean, I basically discovered them, you know, flicking through the record racks in 1977 and seeing Let There Be Rock. And I remember looking at it and saying, this looks sort of heavy, not totally heavy. I don't like the fact that there's just one guy on the back cover. That makes me think solo album or something. You know, and I'm looking at it and the song titles, I'm thinking, they sound pretty heavy, but you don't know. You know, you never know. This kind of looks like it might be a little boogie and bluesy. But then I remember getting that record home and it being only as us as kids, it was only the second album of all time where every single song on the album was heavy. And the first one was Rainbow Rising.
Right.
And so Let There Be Rock was the second one. And then the Sex Pistols album was the third one. And then Motorhead albums.
Right.
All Motorhead albums. So that was kind of interesting that it had no ballads, nothing mellow enough to be even, you know, close to too poppy to be not heavy enough.
Right. Now what did you come away with that you didn't either know or think about from writing the AC/DC, for putting the AC/DC book together?
I definitely got a lot more of an appreciation for all of the later albums and the intricacies of them, because I would find very smart people who would say, "Hey, man, I love Ball Breaker, for example."
Okay.
Or you know, Joel from Airborne was all about Razor's Edge and how cool that was growing up. So it's like wherever you you know, all of us through life, wherever we kind of parachute in on a band, sometimes that's going to be your most magical album in most cases.
Sure.
So all these different age groups would parachute in at different spots. And I just, because every single album is going to have roughly the same amount of words applied to it, you know, you know, basically every AC/DC album pretty much past Flick of the Switch, except for Razor's Edge, most people don't think about or know much about at all. And I'd have, you know, deep tracks on Ball Breaker or whatever pointed out to me, like, I love what he did in the chorus here, and this is the only time they use slide, and this is a great gang vocal here, and this song sounds like some other old song. It's like, wow, you know, there's not a lot of albums I could have done this with. And granted, you know, I did ask people to prepare a little bit,
sure,
you know, to go back and make some notes, but it really pays off. It really makes you go back and appreciate, you know, the dark corners of these catalogs.
No doubt. Now, the $1 million question, will they retire, and should they retire?
Oh, I think they will, and I think they should. And the only way they would come back, and this is completely plausible, but, you know, in case Brian wants to sing another record. But AC/DC, it's funny. This is kind of a weird, deep point, but they're so famous that I don't think they think like normal people anymore.
Okay.
And, you know, sometimes I think a band that does think like normal people still, but has other considerations that they have to always take into account, as a band like Metallica. I think AC/DC probably don't think normally anymore. And the reason I say that is it's almost like what I would love them to do, this is what I think would be perfect, is if Brian comes back and they do another amazing album and they don't tour it. I mean, they basically say, Brian says, I can't sing this stuff anymore. I don't want to embarrass the band, because it was ostensibly medical issues anyways with his voice that, if I remember correctly, right, that has been cited for having no Brian anymore.
Right.
But, I would love them to do that. Go make another record. Don't even bother touring it. That would be ideal for me. But the reason I say they probably don't think clearly or straight anymore, or too many business things come in, they strike me as a kind of band that would almost, and I would hate to see them do this, they strike me as a kind of band that would almost go out on tour again without another record and without Brian, just to do something, just to cash in, or, like, why would they even need to cash in? I have no idea. But just to go out and be AC/DC live, I don't know, stroke their egos, who knows? But I could almost see them as much going out with Axl Rose, for example, and doing a live show with no album, rather than what they should do, which is make an album with Brian Johnson and then don't tour.
Sure, and it's funny, we've talked about this a million times on the show, especially when Axl came in, and it was our opinion, and I'll admit that we were wrong, because from every account the shows were great with Axl. But our thought was always the only way that they could continue would be to get an unknown that kind of can do both things. That's like, to bring in a name, they're always going to be compared, and they're too big to be compared to another guy's band. That's what I thought was the big problem with bringing in Axl. As iconic as Axl Rose is, he's not AC/DC. So it was like a comparison downgrade for them. At least that's the way we thought of it.
But an interesting thing I think that would work is if you wanted to go down this road of who do you get, right? Mm-hmm. What I would do is there'd be three choices, but one can't do it even worse than Brian, and that would be Dan McCafferty. The second choice would be Mark Storace from Crocus. He could do it and would do it and would be great. But my favorite choice would be do what you did when you got Stevie Young in. And it's almost like get someone who's unknown but sort of family. Well, what would that be? Like get someone in possibly, and unfortunately, dear old Doc Neeson is no longer with us from Angel City, but and I don't know, it's probably completely preposterous to think, Angry Anderson could or would do this from Rose Tattoo.
Sure.
But someone like that. I mean, I would say the only guy that would be accepted by us cranky old guys from the 70s would be someone who's Australian, who's kind of from family, and who's well over 50 years old. Someone who's got that pedigree that goes back to then. And so then, unfortunately, I think the only guy left probably is Angry Anderson. That would be amazing. But I would totally love Mark Storace in there too, because, he's can do this. He sounds like a cross between Brian and Bon. He's got the pedigree because Crocus is almost as old as AC/DC.
Right.
They basically sounded like AC/DC the whole time. So he'd be a good fit. And it's just a little bit of a nod to history in the past, and basically saying we're not going to do the showy thing, which would be Axl Rose or anybody else famous from a newer generation. Like, no Americans apply. But Europeans, that kind of makes sense. Mark Storace from Switzerland, that's kind of cool.
Sure.
Kind of exotic. Or an English person. I don't know. Can you think of an English guy who would make sense?
Yeah, I don't know.
Boy, who would make sense?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know. It's you kind of have to come from that kind of scrappy punk rocky thing, and the only reason I mention that is because you think of Paul Rodgers or something like that, but Paul Rodgers doesn't strike me as an AC/DC kind of guy, right?
No, not at all.
Like Mark Storace could sing all those vocals with a straight face, and he's one of the boys, and he would make sense. But imagine Dan McCafferty, because Dan almost apparently got the nod back then, and he was too loyal to Nazareth and didn't want to leave. I think Mark Storace was the same situation. His name was brought up. So that would be. I wonder if Angry Anderson, man, that would be amazing. But he, like I say, he's also a 7-year-old guy, and you ask him to go out there and sing like that, it's probably unrealistic.
Probably, and I know he doesn't have the history with the band, and he is a bit younger. But the guy you mentioned earlier, Joel from Airborne, he would probably do it, and he would bring the right energy to it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I just don't like the incongruity of the massive, 2, 3 generation age
Right.
gap thing, right? I mean, I really think they need an old legend, but I love the idea of them being a little subversive about it and getting somebody a little underground, a little punk rock, a little off the radar, but just as a little message to the old guys that this is a guy that makes sense.
No doubt, man. Well, Martin, you have these two great books, AC/DC album by album, as well as Led Zeppelin, all the albums, all the songs. There's probably 30 more books, unless my count is low, that you've written as well. Tell people where they can look to get these books, to get all of your books, to find out what you're working on next, etc.
Yeah, so I've got martinpopoff.com, and a big part of my annual income, I suppose, it's a meager income, but a big part of it is the mail order, signing and shipping of my own books. So I have a whole lot of books there that are self-published and not available anywhere else. So you could get those from there, and I sign them all and ship them out. But even these ones, I buy a small supply and sign and ship them out. So there's PayPal buy now buttons for U.S., international, Canada, mailing books all the time. Definitely strike a good deal if somebody wants 2 or 3. But yeah, they're all there, and last count, I suppose it's about 71 books.
Oh my
and
goodness!
I would say that about 50 are available still, and so that's all. There's a full page of explanation at martinpopoff.com. Anybody can email me at martinp@inforamp.net for a quote. Tell me where you are. I'll work something out. But yeah, there are probably a good 30 there that are only available from my site. They aren't in any stores anywhere around the world.
Excellent. Well, Martin, as a tradition on the show, we always let the artist pick a closing track. Maybe pick a Zeppelin track for us to wrap this up for, and tell us a quick story about it to wrap it up.
Wow. Let's go with my favorite Zeppelin track of all time, which would be Celebration Day.
All right.
I love the complicated, strange riff that kind of goes on forever. It's a little bit like how Black Dog goes on forever. It's one of Jimmy's most sophisticated, strange, loopy songs. I love the way the vocal phrasing weaves in and out of it, that it's one of the heavier songs on that album. Great melodic chorus. So yeah, that's definitely my favorite Zeppelin song of all time.
All right, well, let's play it right now. It's Led Zeppelin. It is Celebration Day right here on your Classic Metal Show.